So welcome to today's webinar on how will artificial intelligence change accessibility testing. We are joined by Barrell from DQ, Alice Taylor from AbilityNet, and Robin Christopherson, also from AbilityNet. And I'll just be walking through some housekeeping. And my name's Kelly Chan, also from AbilityNet. So just on to the next slide, please. Thank you, Freya. So welcome. Live captions are provided today by MyClearText. You can switch them on via the control panel and the CC option. Additional captions are also supplied on StreamText, so you can access those on www.streamtext.net/player?event=AbilityNet. And slides, notes, and transcripts and the recording will be available on our webpage, abilitynet.org.uk/AI-accessibility-webinar. And please feel free to leave feedback on this webinar as you'll be directed to a form after this webinar ends. So just a little bit about AbilityNet, if you aren't aware of us. We're a charity that uses technology to help transform the lives of disabled people at home, at work, and in education. We do this by providing accessibility testing and training, workplace consultancy and assessments. We also offer consultancy for higher and further education institutions. And we also offer free services, IT and accessibility support at home, and we do this through online resources such as like this webinar today, and we also have a group of volunteers to help us. On to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just to set the scene for today, we'd love to just find out a bit more about you. So we have two polls. So the first poll is, who do we have here today and what's your job title? So we're just going to launch that poll now. Thank you. So please feel free to fill out the poll. The options are accessibility tester, software developer, UX/UI designer, product manager, or other. And if you're filling out other, please feel free to pop in the Q&A what your job title is, and I can just shout out a few. So we have Michelle, Digital Accessibility Lead, Dustin, Director of Security, David, Learning and Development, another David, Accessibility Specialist. We've got a Resource Manager here, welcome, Senior Innovator, Test Engineers, a lot of accessibility advisors or Head of Disabilities here today as well. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds, and then if you could just end the poll. Oh, and we've also got, sorry, our second poll as well. Just realised it's running at the same time. So we do have a second poll, and that's just on how do you feel about AI and the future of accessibility? And the answers are just excited and not concerned, equally concerned and excited, and more concerned than excited. So I think that's enough time, and I can see the responses are getting less and less. So if we could just end the poll, please. Thank you. And we're just sharing the results, but I'll read them out as well. So today we have 19% accessibility testers, software developers 7%, UX and UI designers 12%, product manager 5%, and 58% others. And I've already read out just a few in there. And then how do you feel about AI and the future of accessibility. So 18% of you feel excited and not concerned. 79% of you feel equally concerned and excited, which I think is understandable. And then 3% of you feel more concerned than excited. So thank you for filling out our poll. So if you could just stop sharing, thank you. If we could move on to today's webinar. So I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Robin Christopherson. He'll be just hosting the panel discussion today. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Brilliant to have so many people here and a really broad range of experience, roles, and hopefully everyone will find this chat really, really informative. I know I will, because we've got two amazing people here. We've got Alice from AbilityNet, and we've got Dylan from DQ. So I'll very quickly say who I am, Head of Digital Inclusion. If I forget to look at the camera, it's because I'm blind myself. I've been in this area for 26 years with AbilityNet now, and very, very interested in AI. And hopefully we're going to dig into what the future looks like, not just for accessibility testing, but also kind of a slightly broader remit as well. Alice, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Robin. Hi, everyone. My name's Alice. I'm a Principal Accessibility Consultant at AbilityNet. I've been here around 4 years now. Prior to this, I worked as a front-end developer, and this is where I first learned about accessibility. And like Robin, I'm really excited to be part of this webinar and share a bit more about AI and the impact on the user.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And over to Dylan. So DQ, for those who aren't aware of DQ, there will be some, I'm sure. Yep. Please do introduce yourself and what DQ do.
Okay. Well, I've had the privilege of working with DQ for going on 15 years now. And DQ really started out when accessibility was really in its infancy in 1999. And our mission, we're a mission-driven organization, is digital equality. I was also very privileged to be able to start the AXCore project while I was working at DQ. So I'm the founder of the AXCore project and have worked on a lot of different customer projects as well as the internal software that DQ develops. And I used a lot of that experience to also write a book called the Agile Accessibility Handbook, which is designed to help different parts of an organization understand how to really embed accessibility into the Agile development lifecycle. So that's a bit about me and a bit about DQ.
Fantastic. We'll hear a lot more about what DQ does a little bit later on. So this is about AI, but actually it's mostly about HC AI, which stands for human-centered AI. And so that's, you know, a kind of a twist, a take on AI. And let's first get a definition from Alice about what she sees HCAI as being.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, so we can see AI is continuously learning from human input, and we can all see it's evolving very rapidly at the moment. But as it evolves, we want to ensure that the human needs are always put first. So making sure that the AI needs are secondary to human. So the concept of human-centered AI wants AI to be used to enhance human experiences and consider things like ethics and privacy. But ultimately, a concept to make sure we're moving forward AI development more positively.
Fantastic, thanks. So yeah, putting the humans into AI, or making sure that we're not pushed out of the AI evolution. Some say revolution. Dylan, so you know, obviously DQ are experts on automated testing, and you're going to have a laser focus on where AI kind of sits into that now and in the future. So HCAI, that particular angle where, you know, it's human-centered, what does that mean to DQ particularly, before we may broaden it out more generally? You know, is it a genuinely helpful concept, or is it marketing? What do DQ think?
Well, there's always a little bit of marketing in everything, right? But at its core, if you're familiar with the AXCore project, It was our third generation of accessibility testing software, and the big difference between that version of accessibility testing, other than the fact that we created an open source piece of software that we shared with the world, was that we'd really embedded one of the biggest learnings we'd had over the previous 10 years, which was the understanding that generating a lot of noise and a lot of false positives is not really helping the people that are using the software, and it's not helping the industry, and it's actually was causing a lot of damage. We had developers and subject matter experts who really couldn't trust the tools. You got a lot of different results from different tools, and so that was part of why we did that. And that philosophy of zero false positives really is a human-centric philosophy, because what we're saying is that in order to for the automation to be useful, it needs to really make the user of that automation more effective, and it needs to not introduce either errors or things which are going to cause them to do stuff that is essentially either not necessary or is counterproductive. So from that perspective, it's part of kind of our automation DNA, is this concept that whatever automation, whether it's AI or not AI, really the key around that automation is to make the human more effective and more efficient at what they're doing anyway. So we've really extended that, and one of the implications for the way that we looked at AI, we've been doing AI now for going on 5 years. And we started out with what we call visual AI, which is where we take the rendering of the application and we try to use that with object detection models, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later if it comes up. But we tried to then do things that are very difficult to do purely semantically, but there are things that, for example, people with particular senses may or may not be able to do themselves as well. And so then we can take that sense that we've implemented in that AI model, and we can combine that with the semantics, and we can look for disconnect, right? So that's where we started. But when we did that, we had a decision. Do we just try to generate a bunch of issues from that, or do we take a different approach? And we found that even though we have really good data and really good training and really good models that underlie a lot of this, we still weren't getting close to 100% accuracy with our AI. So our approach was then to say, okay, let's put the human once again at the center, and we'll do a bunch of stuff as much as we can with this AI, and then we'll ask the human to make the final decision. So that's kind of a philosophical approach that we took. And as our models get better, and where we can get up to that 100% or very close to that 100% accuracy, then we're starting to include them in our full automation. So that's kind of the approach that we've taken. And the reason is because regardless of how we're doing that automation, we really want to make sure that it's helping the human at the end of the day.
Yeah, so it's an ever more sophisticated aid for the human's evaluation of a website or a mobile app or whatever it might be. Right. Yeah, I love the idea of perhaps potentially broadening out or kind of making allowances for someone like myself, for example, who can only test a limited amount of things when it comes to website accessibility, for example, because there's a lot of visual stuff. Correct. And the promise that one day, not only will I be able to know exactly what's in a photograph, or, an image on a website, for example, in terms of its, having really useful, accurate feedback about the different components that are in that image, but also the context, is it a group of people on some steps in front of a building? I mean, that's where we're probably at the moment, versus, this is a group of protesters about to storm the White House or something. Oh, is that a bit political? Sorry, something like that. Context is king, isn't it? So, and absolutely. I mean, AI is moving so fast that, I'm sure people on this call are well aware of the fact that things are going apace. And so, yeah, we can talk about future-facing strategies or kind of like what your plans are for that going forward. Alice, I mean, your day-to-day working with, auditing, testing for compliance of websites and apps, etc. Do you see there being an ever more sophisticated role for human-centered AI or AI of any kind to aid the tester?
Yeah, I think what you said, Dylan, about for automation to be useful, it needs to be effective is a really, really good point, because you know, these tools, they need to work. We need to be able to trust them to be able to use them effectively. And I can see AI definitely having more of a part to play in that. But I guess at the moment it's maybe at the point where automation was a few years ago, just around the trust level of where it's at. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Dylan.
Yeah, the trust is an important thing, and you know, there's been a lot of hype around ChatGPT, and a lot of it is obviously justified because it can do amazing things. But one of the biggest problems that I personally have with ChatGPT is it's kind of like the mansplaining of search, right? Because it's equally confident when it tells you a complete fabrication as it is when it tells you something that is the truth, and it doesn't provide the context to help you determine whether the answer that's just given you is in fact accurate, right? So that context is missing. How did it arrive at that answer? So I think you are starting to see some AI systems or systems that include AI start to also try to expose more of the why did we arrive at this answer, so that you can help the person who the answer is being given to, whatever that may be, to determine for themselves the degree to which they can trust that, because that is often, you know, that context is often trust, right? So we've all become familiar over the last 25 years now that it is with Google, to sort of look at the Google results and figure out whether we think that the result we were presented with is trustworthy or not. And we're going to have to relearn those sorts of same skills in the AI world, and the AI systems are going to have to adapt to be able to engender that trust and give people enough information to understand whether they can trust what they're being presented with.
Yeah, confidently wrong. I love the mansplaining.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
so fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever try and ask ChatGPT to analyze the landscape of whatever it might be in another country other than your own, then 100% with 100% regularity, the answer that he or she or it comes back with, and you can see this from the resources that are linked to at the bottom of the message that you receive. The first one is about the country that you made the query about, and the last four are about the UK or whatever your region is that your browser is set to, I guess. So it's confidently telling you about lots of things, 4/5 of which is based upon the wrong country altogether. So yeah, a long way to go. But having said that, you know, that it can do code. We should talk about how successfully, and it can analyze UIs. I don't know if you want to go back to that, Dylan, but Alice, very briefly. So you were trying to get it to create accessible code, weren't you? Even something as simple as a carousel. How did you get on with that?
Yeah, it's so yeah, in ChatGPT, I was able to ask it to create me accessible components, and that was creating quite interesting outcomes, because some of them were what you'd expect, and I'd say they were pretty correct. They were given the HTML output, so I guess that's it's kind of information that you could find, you know, on ARIA authoring practices, for example, which has all that those accessible code examples. But then some things, it was coming back when it just wasn't quite right. Like you kind of say, it was kind of confidently not right with that. So if you weren't if you didn't know what that was, you could easily just use it thinking it was correct, because it was given that sense that that was right. But I guess with ChatGPT, the way it's working is it's learning off that human input. But at the moment with the web, we don't have, it's not fully accessible. So I guess if it's learning off all that information, then how the output isn't necessarily going to be fully accessible at the moment.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
What do you think, Dylan?
No,
Sorry.
absolutely. I was about to say garbage in, garbage out.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, these, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, these ML models, especially ML-based models, they're essentially big statistical machines, right? So they're statistically correct, you know, given the data that they were trained on, right? So that's really the way to look at them. And as Alice correctly pointed out, we wouldn't have, you know, as many people as we have on this call today if accessibility had been solved, and if all of the code that was out there was already perfectly accessible. So clearly, it's being trained on code which is wrong, and so unlike, you know, I liken this to the difference between the tests, the sort of tests that you can do for, you know, or the search, sorry, not the test, the learning curve you go through as a developer if you're trying to learn a new framework like React, right? And how you can go out and you can find code on the internet and you can copy it and you can paste it into your editor and you can run it. And if it's correct code, it'll run it, it'll do what you want it to do, right? But the same sort of certainty doesn't exist with accessibility because of the nuances, because of all the different disabilities and the combinations of disabilities. And so that same problem exists. The code that you're going to get from ChatGPT and systems like that is going to run well. It's going to do the functionality wise, it's going to do a very good job. And if it isn't, you'll tell it to do something different and it'll fix it, right? But with accessibility, it's just that little bit more difficult because the examples that are out there that's being trained on aren't quite accurate.
Yeah, and I mean, as we know, I'm sure both organizations know only too well, there can sometimes be a gap, sometimes quite a significant gap between technical compliance against WCAG and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and real life, you know, usability for people with diverse needs. And that's where the human may always be needed. So you've got the ever more sophisticated automated solutions, and, you know, we can dig a bit more into what you're hoping that, you know, Axe or other solutions might be able to achieve going forward, and what we think they still probably won't be able to touch in 2, 3, 5 years time. But then, you know, how much will AI be able to act or interpret or predict what someone with dyslexia or a motor difficulty or, you know, a vision impairment of various kinds would find challenging with a UI, with the interoperability of a particular thing, over and above the code being strictly compliant. So yeah, next month, with the update of Windows 11, Windows is going to get a Copilot. Every Office app is going to get a Copilot. These are the uses of ChatGPT specific to those particular apps. VS Code and, you know, Visual Studio is going to get a Copilot. GitHub is a Copilot. So, you know, it's definitely going to be in the realm of code. How useful is it going to be? How is it going to be aiding people to create better code, or is it just going to be providing code that might compile and run? So I don't know if either of you want to take any of those points.
Yeah, I can definitely give you my opinion. I think, I mean, I used Copilot when it was, you know, still in beta, and it's a fantastic tool. And so what it does is it makes the human a lot quicker at writing grunt work code, right? And so it will definitely continue to fulfill that role, and it'll do really well at that. And then it'll get better over time. And so we could be sitting here 10 years from now, and a lot of, you know, the advances tend to be kind of non-continuous. You get these huge leaps, right? And so now we're kind of fine-tuning ChatGPT, and it has its limitations, but who knows what the next advance is that we actually make. And so I'm not going to be the one who sits here and say it'll never get there, because it very well could, especially if you start to take more context into account and you start to include information from design systems and other things into the overall a set of information that's available to these systems. So you'll start to see not single models, but multiple models or agents talking to each other, and who knows, the power that will emerge as we really start to understand those and build those sorts of systems out there. So where it's going to be in 5-10 years, I don't want to sit here and say it's not going to get there. But we're a very practical company. We have to help our customers right now, right? So right now, for me, it's pretty clear. Use Copilot, absolutely. If your organization allows you to use Copilot, use it, because it's going to make you so much more efficient. All that grunt work code you won't be able to write. Even use it to try to tell you to write accessible code. But what you shouldn't do is just assume that is accessible. So you're still going to have to do the testing for quite some time now. Even if a lot of the code is being generated by AI, you still need to test it. You still need to validate it. And it's certainly not going to get rid of usability testing, people with disabilities and other sorts of usability testing, to make sure that the systems that are being developed are actually usable and not just, as you said, Robin, technically accessible.
Thanks. Alice, do you see AI playing a more significant role in your testing process, which is majority manual, by driven by need, really, because there is so much that tools can't yet rule on emphatically, to the point where we can rely on exactly what they're saying. They might, particularly at scale, be hugely beneficial, cost and time saving, but there's still a lot that you need to do. Are you hopeful that AI will start to hack away at some of the grunt work?
I'm very hopeful. That would be great. Yeah, I think it's like Dylan was saying, it's got a long way to go, but I wouldn't want to say that it's never going to happen. But in terms of the testing, it feels like, because the way WCAG is at the moment, it's testable criteria. So it feels like that maybe an AI could learn that to test those specific things. But then when you start, then beyond that, so you could have a compliant website, thinking about the user testing of it, and having that crossover between accessibility and usability. It's, while, like I think it was mentioned earlier around, could an AI find out issues that someone with dementia might experience, for example? Ethically, is that right? Should it be, if we then go back to human-centered and thinking the human is at the center of it, should an AI be the thing to tell us that? Or to me, it feels like humans should always play that role in use testing and having that output. But yeah, in terms of the actual kind of AI and testing for accessibility failures, it feels that it could go there, but I don't know if it could in the future. But yeah, with the code itself, it's, again, with the output that we get at the moment is very much HTML, but with the way a lot of companies work, you don't have that. Using just static HTML is rarely what companies would use. They'd integrate it into their own systems. They might be using React, they might be using different JavaScript frameworks. So even if you can get that output in HTML, you'd still have to have a human integrate it at the moment. And again, maybe that's where AI could go around looking at that, but so hard to know at the moment.
Yeah, and today, no automated solution can really touch JavaScript, can it? So like you say, that rules out 90% of the sites that are basically web applications. We're living in a Web 2.0 world here, but they are still massively useful for flagging an awful lot that would otherwise take a lot of time to run down. So Dylan, I mean, Axe and your the full suite of testing solutions that Deque have developed and provide, 2 years ago versus where you are now versus 2 years from now, will we see a big difference, attributable to HCAI, your approach to applying HCAI?
I think the short answer is yes. That's definitely what our intent is, and we have some good advances that we've made in various different areas that are not yet showing up in our tools. We first have to figure out how to use some of these new models and do proof of concepts with that, so I can see what what's going to be coming over the next 6 to 9 to 12 months, and there's definitely some advances there. Our personal, our aim at DQ is to try to increase our coverage by 10% a year over the next 3 years.
Coverage of the criteria?
Well, no,
sorry,
that's not quite how we measure it. No, the way we measure it is in terms of risk and testing effort, right? So those are the two things we measure. So take, for example, color contrast. It's a single success criteria, at least the original one is, but it's a really difficult thing to test because you need eyedroppers and you go and pick the correct pixels, and then so it's really time consuming to test. It isn't that way anymore because we wrote automated tools to help us with that, right? But if you look at the original amount of effort that it took to do that, and today it's instantaneous for the most part, that's really a huge value, and that's the way we look at things from the effort perspective. Let's look at the things that take a long time to test, and let's try to automate those. And then the second thing we look at is really the errors that are made most often, and some of that has to do with success criteria like 412, name, role, value. That's just applies to almost everything, right? So but there's a large volume of things in any given user interface where the developer or the designer or whatever could make a mistake with that particular success criteria. So we try to focus on the volume of things that actually can be done wrong. And so clearly there we focus on 412, 131, all those sorts of success criteria that have a large amount of kind of scope. And that's because at the end of the day, once again, from a human perspective, we're trying to make the human more effective, right? It takes a very little bit of time to test language of page. And that is one success criteria, just like 412 is one success criteria. So looking at it from a success criteria perspective, it doesn't really help you evaluate how useful the tools are to the human. So that's how we approach it. And we actually use our data to tell us statistically, when we do assessments, where do we find and report the most amount of issues? And we use that data in a very targeted way to focus on the areas we cannot yet test. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking. So measured by those two metrics, we are trying to increase by 10% every year. In other words, decrease the amount of testing that has to be done by, at this point in time, by almost 20% a year over the next 3 years.
Fantastic. We have Q&A at the end, sort of 15, 20 minutes worth of that. Prior to that, Dylan's going to nicely summarize with a couple of slides the DQ position on the application of HCAI. But in the few minutes remaining, I want to go really crazy and talk about what the future of AI could be. Do you subscribe to the, Skynet scenario? Do you think that it will be so sophisticated a personal assistant that this concept of UIs, of web pages, of mobile apps, of mobile phones are just completely nonsensical because, the interface is your voice, or Neuralink if Elon Musk, gets his way. Do you think that AI will make the UIs of today, the IO methodologies of today, completely redundant in 50 years' time? Alice, let's start with you.
Oh, I was hoping Dylan would start with that.
Oh, no. You can just say, yes, Skynet is going to happen and we're all going to die. So UIs won't make any difference.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see where the future, what the future holds for AI and where it's going to go with it. It's definitely at the point at the moment where it's assisting rather than doing. So it's doesn't seem to be replacing anything, but assisting users. But then it seems like that's, from a human-centered AI approach, that's kind of what we'd want it to be doing, just assisting and improving the user experience, again, from ethics and privacy perspective as well. So yeah, it's really, really exciting to see where it's going to go.
Yeah,
great.
I mean, my answer to this is no. It will not replace UIs because UIs will evolve, and if speech is a UI and then therefore audio is a UI, the one's input, the other one's output, then accessibility principles still apply to that. So understanding, for example, as an accessibility principle of the 4 still applies to you know, the speech output, and also the vocabulary that's required to get the agent to do what you want it to do. So the short answer for me is no, it will not replace accessibility, and UIs will exist. I think a more interesting question, which I think you posed as while we were preparing for this, was will screen UIs exist?
That's what I meant, actually. When I was saying UIs, I just realized I was thinking GUIs. I was thinking, you know, graphical. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's so ironic because the spoken prompt, and I think a lot of careers in the future are going to be how well you can, you know, play these AIs, these large language models, like a well, you know, tuned violin, how well you are, how good you are at being able to craft the right prompts, etc. And we've really kind of come full circle back to the command line, because that's basically what a text input prompt or a spoken prompt is. So I was really talking about graphical user interfaces, and and you know, you think they might be I
don't think they'll completely be eliminated. I mean, people still you know, use 9-track tapes or whatever, and so I think there will be uses for them, right? Because they still but will we use them as intensively as we do today? The answer is probably not. We will probably learn to utilize the other forms of interaction more, and it will replace some of the times that we would use the screen. But the example, I think, which a lot of people in accessibility understand, that for me indicates that these things won't die, they'll continue, is the difference between a Braille and a screen reader, right? So if you're sitting in a conference and you're listening to a presenter, you know, a screen reader is much more difficult to use than a Braille keyboard input, right? And so that's an example of where, you know, can I sit in an audience at a conference, and if the only input I have is speech, that's not going to work, right? If everybody in the audience is talking to the computers all the time, you know, even with microphones. Now, if we have human brain interface, like the brain interface, maybe, you know, but at least for a while, until we have that, I think there will be some role to be played by both keyboards and screen interfaces for quite some time.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, we're a few minutes to the 22 mark. So if we could bring up the slides, and Dylan's going to kindly summarize some of what we've been talking about with regards DQ's approach to HCAI. Yeah,
I mean, this is what we're looking at here is the ACT suite. And I talked a little bit about how we really want to cover the full life cycle of digital experience delivery. So, you know, our products really start at the designer, allowing the designers to communicate their design intent to the dev teams. We have ACTS for designers. We have the ACTS Dev Tools suite of tools that really is designed to help people within the development process develop accessible software. And then we have tools to help auditors audit that and produce reports on that, and then monitor a large-scale monitoring of websites and reporting on that sort of thing with the ACTS Monitor and ACTS Auditor. If you could go to the next slide, please. So one of the things we're doing, I talked about the data that we use in just prioritizing our features. That is data that comes from the assessments we do for our customers. We also try to capture a lot of data as people use our other products. So if customers opt in to allowing us to capture their data, we actually capture that and use that to help train our models. And I think somebody asked a question about how does AI advances tie together with privacy? And there's definitely an interaction there that we think about a lot in terms of how the sort of data that we capture and how we use that. But what we're trying to do is essentially take the hundreds of thousands of people that are using our software every day and use that as a way to make the software itself better. So if you could go to the next slide, please. And so all of this ties together in our human-centric approach. Really, we use models to do things like do object detection, to do object character recognition, to look at visual text and rendering, and then to combine that information that comes from these models with the semantics to look for mismatches, and then present that information to the user, so they can do a one-click decision-making process. So what we try to do is just present them with the decision. We think this is a problem. Here's why we think it's a problem. Do you agree? Yes or no? And then that way we're making them a lot more efficient. We can allow people with this approach, for example, you talked about this, about as a blind person not being able to test certain things. With the tools that we have, blind people can now test things like color contrast that they couldn't previously test. So it actually allows people with disabilities to do a lot more of the testing job than without the tools. So that's really our approach, is to put the human at the center.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. So let's go to Q&A. Have we, Alice, I don't know if you've been, who's going to be telling us, who's going to be sifting and sorting and speaking the questions that we've received?
I've just been having to read through them, so I can pull some out if you like. So one that I've just read is, are there any new accessibility related tools using AI that you're excited about at the moment, or are there any you recommend we keep an eye on?
I think that's for Dylan.
Oh, well, why not Alice?
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah.
As I was reading it out, yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I'm happy to answer that one. So the Be My Eyes app seems to be making some really great advancements at the moment. That's really exciting to see where that's going. So yeah, but for me, that one is one that I'd really be keeping an eye on.
On the Be My Eyes, so for people who aren't aware, it's a brilliant app. You can be a volunteer if you have a working pair of eyes. But it's really meant for people who can't see at all, and they can instantly be put in contact with someone via your camera on your phone who can help you say whether how many minutes there are left on the dishwasher cycle, or which button on this touchscreen appliance where do I press to do a certain thing, because it's a more and more kind of touchscreen world for us. So that's really useful. But they have this Be My AI that's rolled out yesterday, I think, to the general user base, and it uses ChatGPT, and you can take a photo and you can enter into a conversation about exactly what's in that photo, and hopefully video will be coming later in the month. And that's massively useful for me, because going back to that, people on the steps in front of a white building or something, that's what you'd get before, and now you can get everything. You can query that photograph until to the nth degree, and it'll tell you exactly what's what, and it will recognize well-known people, and it'll read placards, and it'll tell you whether they're looking angry or not, all that sort of thing. So yeah, really, really amazing free app that I use all the time whenever I need a pair of eyes, or a kind of a virtual pair of eyes. So yeah, amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm excited about the tools that are starting to emerge, which are really combining multiple different models together, and using ChatGPT. I mean, ChatGPT itself is doing that already, and that will just start to expand. You'll also, I'm excited by some of the agent capability and plugin capability that you have with things like ChatGPT, where you can, for example, plug in another system that when with the rules of when to use that system. So we're playing around with things like that, where the Axe linter capability can be plugged into ChatGPT as an agent, so that the code that gets generated by ChatGPT can be linted before it gets presented to the user. So I think combinations of things like that are what I'm excited about as kind of the technologist who's looking at how we can use those to help with accessibility and testing.
Brilliant. Are you concerned about, or what's your approach to data, the client's data, and to be able to take advantage of these big, large language models and their, super brains? What happens to people's data when they point it at their source code, or at their, accessibility policy document, to say if it's appropriately worded, etc.?
Yeah, so our approach is to give the user the control as to whether they want to allow us to use the data or not. And We also are, you know, very concerned and complying with GDPR. And so if somebody asks us to delete their data, whether or not we're using it for our AI models, we'll delete the data. And so, you know, it's a big concern for us. We definitely make sure that people know and have opted in to allow us to use the data before we use it for any of our models. And we acknowledge that that data belongs to them. So if we delete, for example, a screenshot that somebody has given us permission to use, the next model that comes out will no longer have that information, you know, learned from that particular screenshot. So we don't just retrain. We you know, continually on top of a particular model, we retrain our models from scratch with all the data at that given point in time that we have permission to do training with. So that's kind of our approach right now, but we're also learning. It's a fast developing area, and so interested to hear on people's input on what they think we should be thinking about.
Thanks. Sorry, I hijacked the question process. Alice, do you want to?
There's another one that's come through that looks like a big good for you, Dylan, which is right now, common wisdom is that automated testing can identify 40% of accessibility issues. Do you see this percentage increasing with more automated AI solutions?
I think I answered that, and I think for me the answer is yes. And the 40% number I'm not going to argue with. There are different ways of measuring, and I think the way that I mentioned earlier in terms of effort is really the way we like to measure it. So
great, thanks, Dylan. I can see there's another question that came through, which I think I touched on earlier, so I'm happy to take that one, which is, do you think that AI has or will learn the capability to take on more of the user testing side of things, perhaps taking on different accessibility personas to test some of the less quantifiable tests that can't be automated? To me, I like at the moment, things like ChatGPT can help to create those personas, so that can be really helpful. But in terms of if it could be used to actually test with those personas, I feel like even if it could get there ethically, should it get there? Mm-hmm. And just around at the moment, I tried the other day to see if it would allow you to, if it would give you issues based on from the perspective of someone with a certain disability, and it was able to list back kind of best practices, but it wasn't able to tell certain things. So for example, like this piece of text on this particular website is too close to this image, and that's a problem because sort of thing. But yeah, I think for me, if that were to happen in the future, I'd see that as maybe an ethical question of whether that's right. Is there anything you want to add to that, Dylan?
I think for me, the most important thing is the implication of the end result of what the system does, right? So running a system like that and then coming up with a proclamation of this software is fine, it'll work for all people with a certain disability. I think in the same way, that's kind of like the same mansplaining thing that I talked about with ChatGPT. It's just I think in order for me to trust that, I would need to really know what the justification is for that, right? And so just that, given that one answer without any justification, without any context, without any ability for me to really judge whether it had done a good enough job, I think that's dangerous, right? That for me, that's not ethical. And so could it get to the point where not only does it say it passes, or maybe it gives a grade or something, and it talks about the things that it did test and what it didn't and whatever, and gives you enough context to then make a decision whether that's, you know, whether that's good enough. That might be useful, right? That might be useful to you, for example, as a professional, to look at that and say, okay, what do I still need to test, or where are the problems with this? And if the system gets to that point, I think it could be useful. But that's not, unfortunately, the way that any of the systems that exist today that are trying to do that operate. So you know, they're problematic in my opinion right now.
Yeah,
It's a
so
challenge.
oh, sorry, Robin. I definitely say right now it's definitely not anywhere near that. I can see there's another comment about there's always going to be room for humans in sense checking what AI says. So I definitely agree with that humans should, I think, as you said before, Dylan, about code, just reviewing, it's really important for no one to just assume that the AI is correct, and it should always be sense checked.
It's a really interesting one because, so at AbilityNet, we have diverse user testing services. We don't recommend that we, apply those testers to a site or an app that hasn't compliance done on it from a code point of view, because they might fall at the first hurdle. They might not be able to access the user journeys at all. It'll be flagging a load of stuff that there'll be so much noise, and it'll take them so long they might not get to the end of the journeys, etc. Be so frustrating for them. So do the due diligence on the code compliance side of things first, then get the end users involved. Now, the extension of that is, well, do we get some semi real end users involved in the form of AI personas, or asking the AI to rule on code or UI elements with its knowledge of what people with a range of different impairments experience, and then get the end users to sort of triple check. That might make it more feasible from a budget point of view, because imagine in the future if AI can say, well, of the 18 different types of, main types of vision impairment, here's a summary of the kind of issues that the page might present, and this is after the code compliance work has been done. And so when the actual end users come along with a vision impairment, they can, really fine tune and get all the kind of, stuff, so that at the end of the day, it's a Rolls Royce, experience. Because we have to live in the real world. Budget is an issue. And, if you've only got one or two vision impairment testers, then you've only tested it with two people with a vision impairment. And, there's so much variety even in that area, and multiply that by the others. So yeah, we kind of have to be pragmatic as well at the end of the day.
You definitely bring up a good point. It might, it might be a good tool for finding areas that really that are quote unquote problematic, right? So if the tools were to be used in that way to say, we think this area of the usability might be a problem, then you could focus a lot of user testing on that, for example, right? Would be another potentially useful way to use that sort of technology.
And certainly critical user journeys should always be triple checked.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one. Got 5 or 6 minutes left before we wrap up. Are there any more?
There's lots and lots of questions. I'm just trying to work.
We will get round to them in a post FAQ on the page that hosts this webinar. We'll answer everyone's question in due time, but sorry.
So there's one I can see. It's, how do you see AI helping with image alt text? Do alt text generated by AI pass audits or provide enough/correct information?
Yeah, I think I think it's useful. I think in particular, if you combine the context that you provide to the large language model and object detection models, if you provide more of the context of the text on the view page screen that image occurs, and if you then it can probably get pretty close to some good descriptions. But once again, I also think that it's probably better to still present that to a user and say, hey, here's all these, these things we think this is a good text description of this in the context of the page or the application, and let them, fine tune that, edit it, and finalize that. I think that's a much better approach than to do something at this point that's completely automated. But as Robin pointed out, it's hugely helpful to him, right? So I think if it takes a lot of the information and presents it, instead of just trying to come up with a definitive alt attribute, rather describes all the things it can see and their relation to each other, and then Robin can, with the context of the page or the application, can probably figure out what that image is supposed to mean in that context, right? I think that can be very useful. So I think I think it's a really good tool for end users when people have forgotten that, but I don't think it should be used as an alternative for a human really deciding what they think a good alt attribute should be.
Yeah, I mean, anything that can reduce the friction to help people with the day job, or if they're posting a social media post or whatever it might be. So, you know, like on Twitter, or X as it's called now, you know, to add alternative text to an image that you've added you have to expose a UI, you've got to type it in there, you've got to, you know, so it's kind of extra steps. But if it was in line, you know, description, it's just one of the fields that you fill in before you hit post. That would be great. If AI could suggest what the description is, so that, because an empty box is more daunting than one that, you know, do I put image of? I can't remember whether I have to put that at the beginning, you know, that sort of thing. So that would be really cool too.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Yeah.
There's a comment that's just come through related to that, which is the problem I see with AI descriptions for alt text is that even if the alt text is descriptively correct, it may be that what the image represents is already covered in textual content on the page, and as such might be better off marked as decorative.
Yeah, that's always the case. Yeah.
Controversial.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Yeah, okay.
It's always always controversial,
it's
and it's always the case, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. If it's adding nothing and it's, you know, eye candy, but yeah, I mean, inline context, inline description is better than nothing, particularly if it refers to the image, because if the image is unlabeled or cryptic, I don't know what I'm missing. I don't know that it's been described in the body of the, you know, the surrounding text. So what have I missed? You guys know, because you can see it's that, and you can see it's been explained to death in the text, but I don't know.
Yeah,
so yeah, if you make it decorative, then I suppose you could say that, but that might not validate, so I don't know.
Right, but and so what is decorative, right? So if the text is there and it really describes everything that's in the image, why do you have the image? Right, so that's the question I always ask. Why is the image there in the first place? So why don't you just delete the image? And if you say, oh, okay, well, there's you know, it's helpful to people, well, then why is it helpful? What is missing from the textual description that that makes that image still helpful? So I think that's one way to think about it. And then, you know, really the only decorative images are images that you could really replace with a different image, and it would not change the page at all, right? So the, you know, sort of banners, background banners of like happy people using a product, but it's really, it could be different happy people using the product in different ways. It doesn't really matter which image. You know, those are the things that are really decorative. Yeah.
Good call. Okay, to be able to have any chance of finishing prompt on the hour, I'll go back to Kelly to wrap up. But yes, we will provide feedback on all of the outstanding questions on the webinar page in a few days.
Thanks so much, Robin, Dylan, Alice. That was just a brilliant discussion. And like Robin mentioned, any unanswered questions we hope to answer online in the next few days, and you'll receive an email with a link to access them. So if I could just get the slides back up. Thank you very much. So finally, just a bit more information that you might be interested in. TechShare Pro 2023 returns on the 14th to 15th of November. So you can join us to be a part of Europe's largest gathering of accessibility and inclusion professionals. You can still get your early bird ticket today at www.techsharepro.com. Next slide, please. Also, we'd love it if you could take our third annual Attitudes to Digital Accessibility survey, which is open now for responses until the 30th of September. So we're looking to gauge what are the organisational approaches to digital accessibility. So you can complete the survey at abilitynet.org.uk/attitudes. And finally, on to the last slide. We have lots of resources to help you with your accessibility journey, including our How to Make Your Content Accessible resource hub at /accessible-content-resources. We also offer accessibility and workplace training. So our webinar attendees can use our 10% discount code AbilityNet Webinar 10. And a very popular upcoming course includes our accessible and inclusive recruitment training. We have an e-newsletter which you can sign up to as well at abilitynet.org.uk/newsletter, so you can be the first to hear about our webinars like the one today, including next week's webinar on tech tools for dyslexia at work, in education and at home. So thank you so much again for joining us, everyone, and thank you, Robin, Alice and Dylan. Please do complete the feedback form that you'll be directed to after the webinar, and we'll be in touch with you really soon. So thank you so much, and bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.